jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show.
Join us as we cover many an insane movie and numerous cult TV phenomenons. Are you ready to get jacked up? Are you with us? Then listen on.
Listener discretion is advised. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show.
Okay, welcome. Here we are once again, talking about another fantasy adventure show, and here to join me is superfan Bri Castellini. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, Cam.
Thank you for assembling this. I was just like, I was doing my usual networking, and Bri had just a section of giant different topics, and I was like, I'll bite. I can do that one.
You were like, yeah, we just talk about things. And I was like,
Never in a
that's
million
not...
years would I have scheduled that, but that's a good topic. So, shit, I'll do it.
Hell yeah, dude.
So, how would you describe just how you got into these? Were you more familiar with the books, or did you come into the fantasy show first and then start reading the books, or were you just always a fantasy completist in general?
Yeah, so I kind of fell backwards into Outlander. I remember a couple of years ago,
Not
my
to be
mom
confused with the
mentioned it to me.
similar Highlander.
Right, exactly. Different show, although similar.
Similar,
But yeah,
but not the same.
a couple of years ago, yeah, my mom was really into the show. She mentioned it offhandedly to me, and I was like, that sounds like a lot. No, thank you. I read fantasy a lot as a kid, not so much as an adult. I went more into sci-fi the older I got. So I wasn't really looking for it, but then she mentioned it was on Netflix, and I remembered her mentioning it a couple of years later, about 2 years ago now, I would say, right at the beginning of the pandemic, and checked out the first season, enjoyed it, binged the rest of the show that was available to me at the time. And then my mom mentioned that there were books that she already had all of on her Kindle, and I share an Amazon account with her, and I was like, well, free books, why not? Then got very into those, and I have now surpassed her. So I am not only caught up on the show, there's been 5 seasons so far, but I've also read all, I think 7 or 8 of the books that have come out. There was a new one that came out in December or January that I've already read. So I am fully up to date with all things Outlander. I'm even reading some of her side novellas about an ancillary character in the books. I'm deep, Cam. I'm really deep in it.
No, that's awesome. That's great. So, yeah, it's kind of similar, but not really. But I was kind of a similar way. I could not get into fantasy books to save my life, and get this, I was reading all kinds of mystery and sci-fi novels, and then after a while I stopped reading. I started just more reading biographies by comedians or just insiders.
That's exactly what I did too. Yeah, it was
oh, really? Okay,
reading for a decade, then just nonfiction memoirs by comedians, and then nothing for a while.
Oh man, and sometimes I'd go to the grocery store and just see what were the newest bestsellers, and more than half the time I was just like, Jesus Christ, anyone can be an author in this day and age. Anyone can have a stupid borderline softcore romance novel or a pretentious serial killer horror novel on the bestseller list. Is no thank you. If this is what future fiction that everyone is reading and turning into movies or praising about, high velocity about, no thank you. I don't want to be part of this. But writing fantasy is not easy, and I will
really
applaud
tough.
anyone who can go the extra mile, whether it's Dune or Lord of the Rings, and just come up with their own fictional language, quirks to every character, and have a glossary that makes sense to people who get together for a book club and actually digest this material. That is cool. And so my sister had read some of these books, and say hi, Mir. But yeah, she, we had Stars still before our cable package changed, and also known as where all the good shit is right now. But yeah, so would join him occasionally, for first 2 seasons, maybe 3, and that, again, that's where I lost track of it. But it was cool in that it was just a really diverse thing. I had never seen this stunning gal, Catriona Balfe, before, but she's been in just so many kinds of movies: Super 8, Now You See Me, Escape Plan, Ford versus Ferrari. So she's in Dublin, and she's an Irish gal. And
Sorry, is that your Irish accent? Can I get a little bit more in this Irish accent of yours? I gotta hear more.
Jesus.
And speak up, please. You're a little quiet. I'm pretty sure you got to speak really loudly when you're going to do an Irish accent.
I bet. I didn't say I was an actor.
You're the one that started with an Irish accent.
I did. I totally bastardized it. So I know. I done myself a trench. Anyway.
God, that's almost worse than Michael Weston's Irish accent on Burn Notice, which is
Jesus.
how kind of we know each other from my Burn Notice podcast.
Yes. Oh my God, Irish.
Bringing it all together.
I am Irish, but I am not. I'm not a thick. I mean, I can be loud, but I'm definitely not thick with that accent. But
sure.
I don't know if that's the German half mix talking. I don't know. I don't know what I am, but anyway, so.
Existential crisis aside, you had fun. You were enjoying it.
Bastardized accents aside, Jesus, what were we talking about? Anyway, we're talking Sam Hugon. Is that how you pronounce it? Heughan. And
yeah, Sam Heughan and Katrina Balfe.
Katrina Balfe and Tobias Menzies, you've seen as Brutus on Rome, and one of the James Bond movies. So yeah, I took a liking to it. I liked how Ronald D. Moore from the Star Trek sagas and New Battlestar Galactica was the showrunner, and Bear McCreary.
That honestly was like the thing that did it for me, is that Ronald Moore was the original showrunner and adapter. Because like New Battlestar Galactica is one of my favorite shows of all time. Like the 2000s Battlestar Galactica, I fucking love it. And Ronald D. Moore, I was like, I trust you. I will give you some time to get into this. Because I will say the Outlander pilot is a little slow, and like I don't know if I 100% agree with their decision to do voiceover narration. I mean, voiceover narration is tough in TV and movies,
especially
anyway.
Burn Notice.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's what I'll say about Burn Notice, though. Burn Notice's voiceover at least like has a function beyond just giving us exposition. It definitely is giving us exposition, but it's also, giving us helpful spy tips and tricks that I use in my everyday life as a woman. But
I know what you mean.
Exactly.
So
but
often
usually
everyone abuses it.
Exactly. Everyone abuses it. It's basically an excuse to not figure out a natural way to do exposition, which I think is a skill that is, languishing in TV.
Or they pull
right
a Brian De Palma where you got a pretty cool movie, and then you're just like, but can you please do a director's cut where you take that damn voiceover out? Because it gives everything away. I know who's going to end up where. And
yeah, it's like, what is the purpose of this? Like, what is the story narrative purpose of this voiceover? If it's just I'm lazy, not a good excuse. And so I don't. And so like the first season of Outlander definitely has a lot more voiceover. They lean back from it a lot more in later seasons. Like they pull back so much that sometimes I forget there is voiceover until a moment happens. So I appreciate that. They've definitely grown with it. But the first episode certainly is like heavy with voiceover and contemplative internal dialogue, and yeah, it doesn't help. It doesn't really give us a lot. I didn't need that. I mean, they cast this show so well, they don't need it. Everything she's saying, broadly speaking, can be conveyed just by the actors because they're doing such a good job. And so I find that it's a crutch that they didn't need. And I'm curious what went into that decision. I mean, obviously the books are told in first person, so that's also a struggle when you're adapting or prose. that is first person. It's like, all right, well, how are we going to get all this great internal dialogue onto the screen? Oh, I know, voiceover that everyone hates. So I understand that it's tough, but I think they could have found a better way
and
around.
Blade Runner bad, but it's still
Sure.
questionable. But
Still
I
questionable.
know what you mean, where it is like, it doesn't help that in today's society, we are still having to have production companies, complete a pilot. And once it gets picked up, after they get studio notes or re-look at it and realize, okay, we got the sell. Now let's not do anything that got us the sell in the first place. Now let's be more free and improve on what we got. And it does stink how half the time you don't know if you're going to get into a show until the second or third episode or even a season. You just don't know.
It's definitely tough. But overall, I will, like, as soon as, I gave myself a full episode to get into it, automatically like Katrina Balfe, and as soon as like the premise, because when I went into Outlander, I didn't know anything about it. I literally did not even know there was time travel. I went into Outlander just thinking like, my mom likes this show a lot, so I guess I'll try it. It's set in Scotland. I like Scotland. I have a Scottish fiance. It's going to be cool.
Oh.
And then like the time travel thing happens, and I was like, okay, this is very interesting. Now I'm like, you had my attention, now you have my respect. I will continue watching this show. And then of course Sam Heughan's on screen, and you're like, okay, yeah, well, regardless of what else happens, I'm in it for this dude. This dude's great. I'm gonna follow him anywhere. And it went from there. I mean, I love so many things about Outlander. I also hate a lot of things about Outlander, and I have a lot of opinions on a lot of things related to it.
No show is perfect. I mean,
of course not.
What
and
can we say that we're watching now that doesn't drive us up the wall to where we're just like,
exactly.
Okay, I'm tired of telling this character to shut up, even though it doesn't make any difference.
And I think that's good. I think that, shows that you love should be able to be critiqued. One of the things that comes up a lot in our Burn Notice podcast is that fans of Burn Notice hate us because we're critical of it. Certainly like the first season, which, you're critical of most, show
I've gotten
seasons.
that before. I've seen Star Wars and Halloween fans act like nothing can be critiqued.
Yeah, they're above
unless
reproach.
It's
you either love it implicitly and completely, or you're a fake fan. And it's like,
I can't wait till we do DC
shades.
and Marvel, where we just flat out just rank everything, and we're just like, hey, we're going at this objectively as whether or not they work as a movie and or a show. And we're sorry if you're going to do the whole, they're all great. No, that's bullshit. That automatically is false.
Right. And also everyone has different tastes. Like, just because I like something and you don't, or vice versa, that doesn't mean that I think you're a bad person for liking it. Like, I hate Guardians of the Galaxy. Both of those movies piss me off so bad. They're not funny. I find them very irritating. But a lot of people that I know and love like them. You might like them, and it changes my opinion of you not. I don't give a fuck if you like Guardians of the Galaxy. That has nothing to do with you as a person. So I hate when we reduce media critique to like, it's either you think it's perfect or you must secretly hate it, and I can't believe that you're just on the internet being a hater.
And they should stop doing the whole crossing over, because eventually a story's got to end,
Right.
Like, I like the Star Trek shows because they go in their own direction, very rarely interfering. You do you. And like you say, fantasy is just that's what a movie is all to begin with. It's only becomes false when you're not engaged in the world and you just feel like you say, people are just reading. Some fantasy writers have tried to be showrunners of TV shows, and it's often backfired, because it's like, okay, you're describing a bunch of descriptions that really in a script format become 2 sentences, so how do you convey that?
That's the case when you bring somebody from one area of expertise to another. Like, I'm an indie filmmaker, it's my other podcast is, and you see that a lot with screenwriters turned directors, where when you look at a script that's being prepared for direction by the screenwriter themselves, it's a lot of like line readings. Like, they'll go up to an actor and be like, say the line like this, which you should never, pro tip, never do to an actor. But when you're the writer, you're used to having complete autonomous control over the tone of voice, the emphasis, all of these different things. And when you translate that to also being in charge of the literal people who will be speaking the words out loud, there's a translation issue. And the totally same thing happens when you go from prose to screen, is that like the skill set that makes you a great prose writer is not always fully translatable to the screen. And that's not to say that you can't learn it, but it does certainly complicate things and put you at a slight disadvantage to like what makes each individual form of craft special and unique. And not for nothing, but Donna Galbadon, or Gabaldon, or however you pronounce her last name, the author of yeah, I just call her Donna. So Donna is one of the writers and executive producers on Outlander. She has written at least one or two episodes. She was in she had a cameo role in one of the episodes. Like, Donna's all over the place. A lot of opinions about Donna, but I'm curious how much of like the voiceover decision and some other things have to do with the author of the books being in the room for a lot of these decisions. I'm just very curious personally how much that influenced the like development of the show, and like they want to, you know, give credence to like her original prose, and that's what a lot of the voiceover is Donna's original like internal monologue for Claire prose.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if that was like the compromise. Is like, if anything, I will begin it like I would my novels, and then you guys can do whatever the hell you want, you know, adapting.
Yeah, I'm curious. That's just a theory, a theoretical theory, which is why voiceover is so prevalent.
I couldn't find it and see if there were any podcasts or articles citing it. There was, of course, a few recap articles, and but most of it was straightforward meat and potatoes of this is why we wanted to do this. It's like, okay, well, I'm not looking for that. I'm wondering, you know, the A to B to C, you know, how you create an episode. But yeah, so I had no clue it was still going on. I thought it had ended somewhere in between 2018.
They've been picked up for 2 more seasons. One of the new one comes out at the beginning of March. I don't know when this is going out, but we're recording this at the end of February. But yeah, Starz has 2 new seasons.
But no, I know what you mean in that. Yeah, I mean, every show we've covered on here is still ongoing. So it's like people can forgive, you know, outdatedness as long as you're doing a pretty cool recap of most of the season. But yeah, it is interesting in that, you know, it's like it was on again, off again. There was a huge ass gap like in between like airing. It's like it was often.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge gap in airing just because I imagine it's a pretty like intense production schedule. Like, you know, historical stuff in general is tough, but when you add the fantasy aspect to it and like how good that show looks, like so much of that show is the look of it, and they're really treating it like a long movie. So I imagine production takes quite a while, and then with COVID and it being shot in the UK and having such a huge cast with so many like needs and departments that like it's been a while since a new season has come out. And even before that, I feel like it took a while in between seasons. Like I feel like the actors have been on board at this point for like almost a decade. That might be wrong. Don't quote me.
They don't have to worry about career security. It's like, hey,
yeah,
going back
for real,
to wherever to film. And in this case, they are filming it in, according to Wikipedia, it is.
I'm pretty sure they film it in Scotland, at least in part, in somewhere in the UK.
They film it in Czech Republic, even. So
ooh. Yeah, they film all over the place because so much of that show is in exteriors. So you really kind of do need to be on location because you can do a lot with a green screen, but it doesn't replace the practicals, you know. And I'm not one of those people that's like, if you use green screens and special effects, then you're a worse filmmaker and I hate you. But, you know, there is a place for practical effects and being on location versus being in front of a green screen.
Well, and I'm glad you do the indie podcast because a lot of the same notions I had when, you know, this premiered. I was already majoring in film in my college. Don't worry, I didn't make use of it, but I was already kind of just privy to the whole. Okay,
don't worry,
everyone
you'll never see a film by me. Don't worry, you'll never use it. What is that comment?
Well, no,
sliding that in there.
I'm just saying I understood that a lot of our movies, whether we like them or hate them, end up breaking all the rules that are the guidelines. And so I pretty much came down to, okay, this is good for a show. It's not good as a movie or vice versa, or it's good for this kind of movie, but this would be a better as this kind of a movie, time filler, TV film or whatever. And but I had an idea of just, you know, okay, the budget on screen is doing this and that. And I was reading up on what all the cable channels were doing at this point on being competitive and everything. And I saw how the former head of HBO, who's kind of a sexist pig in the background, but yet he's still employed.
He's in charge of a major media corporation. Of course he's a sexist pig. That's like, that's on the job description. If that's not your fucking skill section of your resume, you're not getting the job, my dude.
And he's the head of Starz now. And the sneaky bastard's literally been doing the same thing he's been doing forever. He's like, he pretty much has all these shows just divide up their seasons, which makes it confusing because you're waiting on the home media release or whatever, and you're like, I still got to wait for part 2 of season 1 to try.
Oh shoot.
So it's I think that's part of what they did. They just seemed to realize they were getting, I couldn't read and see if there were any filming delays or what have you, but yeah, they just split up.
There was definitely about a year's filming delay for COVID, but I didn't start like catching up on the show until COVID, so it's hard for. So I don't know how long it took between seasons previous to that, but I was caught up basically the season that was going on, I think, in 2020, and then they did take like I feel like a year's break. I mean, a lot of productions did, certainly ones that hadn't like started yet. So because it's a lot more complicated to keep that many people safe and on location, and COVID adds, I think there was a quote that COVID adds like 30% to your budget, which when you're already a pretty high budget project is a lot. And so knowing what corners to cut and to justify doing it again, I imagine was a complicated conversation. I'm apologizing in advance for the very loud airplane that's behind me. I live right next to the Burbank Airport.
I can't hear it at all. So.
Well, you might hear it on my audio. So this is an audio note. Sorry,
right.
future Cam.
I'm good. And I mean, we're talking outdoor scenes. Yeah, I'm sure it was probably a pain in the ass just getting the right kind of outdoor sound equipment if you're running around.
I can't even imagine the logistical nightmare of filming Outlander.
How much like, already got to do.
Yeah, there's just on a good day, it's probably an absurdly expensive show. During COVID, forget about it.
Kill me now. So, yeah, I'm with you though. This is that they do their best to kind of make it look like a convincing, time period recreation.
Yeah, I've heard the costumes are very accurate. My fiance, who's Scottish, he's also a history major, and he's like watched it with me a couple of times. He hasn't seen all of it, but he's seen a good amount, and I talk about it to him all the time. And he was like, honestly, one of the things I like about this show is that, like, first of all, not every single person they cast is like some sort of weird Adonis. Like, they look like normal people, which I like. Yes. Other than, of course, our leads, who are the most beautiful people in the world. It's honestly hard to look at them sometimes. But he was also like, honestly, these costumes are very historically accurate. And like the amount of layers that you see them having to take off before a sex scene, he's like, yeah, I know what all those pieces are.
They get an A. They totally get an A.
Yeah, apparently their production design is quite accurate historically. So good for them,
allegedly,
I guess.
Historically.
No, I don't know. I wasn't a history major. I don't like boring things, but people who like boring things say that it's very accurate.
I like history. I just don't like it when people talk and don't get to the point. And unfortunately, there are a lot of bad movies that can't sum up any kind of history. Make it coherent. So, and
I mean, I go back and forth on how much I care about that. Like, I appreciate that they've clearly been thoughtful about it, and I especially like it because, like, a big thing that drew me to the books especially is how in depth Donna goes into the like medicine of the time. Like, she does not pull punches in the books on the descriptions of like Claire, amputating a limb or trying to grow penicillin in a lab like in the 1800s or the 1700s, excuse me. And like, I really like that. I like how in depth she goes of like Claire trying to figure out 21st or 20th century medicine in the 18th century. I think that that's really fun and fascinating. And it just shows a level of care and thoughtfulness that I appreciate. How much of it is accurate is sort of, I mean, it's relevant to an extent, but I'm just more interested in like, this seems cool, it seems specific. You don't get something this specific in a lot of properties, historical fiction, fantasy, or otherwise. And I like that care has been put into it. So, whether or not I notice that the skirts are relevant for the time period is less to the sense of like, this feels like a complete world. And I think that's important for the immersion in historical fiction, in fantasy, in sci-fi. If you're not immersed, yeah. If you're not immersed, if it doesn't feel consistent, even if certain things aren't perfectly historically accurate, then it just breaks it for you, and it's hard to take it seriously. But I think Outlander does a really lovely job in film and in books of making it feel like a complete world. And I think a lot of that probably does have to do with how closely they adhere to historical accuracies.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I would watch plenty of historical dramas and even war movies to some extent, and I would get very annoyed at how so many people would just want to just act like something was just, you cannot enjoy this. Oh, they did this and that wrong. I'm like, there's going to be some mishaps somewhere. There's going to be some blueprint.
Right.
So you got to be worried about, is this some kind of well done recreation as well as a relevant movie or what? But it's not.
Yeah, I mean, as with everything, there's shades of gray. You know, there's got to be a middle ground. Like, it's something being perfectly historically accurate doesn't make it a better thing than something that isn't historically accurate, but something that isn't historically accurate isn't inherently bad. You know, it's just, I think it's just the completeness and the thoughtfulness. Even if it is not perfectly accurate, they are thoughtfully attempting to have a complete world that is consistent and feels lived in. And I think they do that.
Oh, 1,000%. And there's nothing worse than hinting at a world and then showing very little of it after all that time and money is spent on it. So I mean,
totally. Yeah, no, I think Outlander uses its budget well. I mean, it's a beautiful show.
Yeah, I can't think of any shot that feels wasted or like is like no thought went into it. It was rushed. It was corrected in post.
No, they're not. Certainly, the filmmaking implies that somebody who really cares about what this is going to look like is shooting it, because there's plenty of shows, historical dramas and beyond, that feel like the camera is just there to record what the actors are saying, and that's fine. In some movies, you know, that's enough. You know, every modern comedy is basically that. Like, the camera is just there.
Isn't having a stroke and shaking it.
But like, you know, there's most modern comedies are just a camera guy following around, you know, improv. But like, Outlander is one of the rare TV shows, especially, that is trying to like make it look cinematic. You know, there's a lot of talk right now about, you know, the gross color grading of a lot of modern TV, including Showtime's own new Dexter season. Dexter, New Blood, Fresh Blood, whatever the new Dexter season is, like the color grading is so ugly, but it's also not inconsistent with what a lot of TV shows are color grading right now. And there's a lot of reasons why color grading is super ugly now. And Outlander doesn't do that. Outlander is like, they are using their full spectrum. This is a show that is meant to capture beauty and is using the camera to tell the story, not just capture it. And that's special. You know, you can feel that even if you don't have a really sophisticated understanding of filmmaking, you can tell emotionally, implicitly, the difference in the thoughtfulness that goes into every single frame of that show. And I really appreciate that.
Totally. And there's nothing worse than when you just feel like, again, like, even if nothing is rushed, if like they're just struggling to find just the appealingness of a scene, you know, it's like it's very ugly when it rears its head and you're just like, why did, like, I see this on Yellowstone, a show I like, and that I can see why people have tried to give up many times. There are plenty of pick-out shots that just feel like they're shot with totally different kinds of cameras at times. I'm like,
my mom also loves Yellowstone. She was trying to get me to watch the prequel show on Paramount Plus, and I was like, Mom, I've never seen Yellowstone. And she's like, but I love Yellowstone, we should watch this together. I'm like, no.
No. We'll get to Yellowstone.
Maybe if I ever watch Yellowstone, I'll come back.
Okay, by all means, I will. Either way, I promise you are going to be on the Battlestar episode. So pros and cons. I mean, I think you pretty much summed it up. Just easy to follow narrative. You believe in the mixture of fantasy set against a historical backdrop. Appealing cast, engaging writing. What other pros?
Other pros for me is just like the core relationship is really exceptional in a way that is super unique. Like, most romantic pairings on TV are kind of boring or, you know, they fall into a fairly classic trope, which is fine. You know, I like tropey, and like, that's fine. But something that I've always liked, and something that like instantly drew me to Outlander and has like forced me through all of the cons that we'll talk about later, is that like they are such a ride or die couple. Like basically as soon as he meets her, Jamie, the male love interest, I don't think we ever explained what the show is about, but I guess you wouldn't listen to this unless you knew what Outlander's about, so whatever. But like,
But no,
Jamie
okay,
Fraser
so 18th
meets Claire.
century time travel is what it's about. But yeah. It's
a nurse from the 1970s or 1950s, I think, gets sent back in time 200
45,
years.
but it's all good.
45, whatever.
They track around. While her current timeline is,
that's why I'm.
Oh, totally. And when her timeline is changing, so is her fantasy connection.
Yeah, it's like it's a linear progression of time. Like however long she spends in the past, she comes back that far into the future. So I think she was gone for like 2.5 years originally. They go back and forth in time a lot. And then when she has a daughter, her daughter and son-in-law go back and forth in time a lot. Like everybody's all over the place in the timeline, but time does progress linearly. So, which I do appreciate. I think that makes a lot of things easy. I have a lot of opinions about time travel and how it's portrayed in media. I think that Outlander does a pretty good job of like staying out of the real sticky stuff and making it kind of possible for us to experience in a way that feels narratively satisfying, but whatever. So the thing that I was going to say about pros is that like, I love that as soon as Jamie Fraser meets Claire, his first thought is like, this lady is awesome. She's so cool. I trust her implicitly. I trust her with my life.
Everything you say,
no
you're not a doctor.
and as soon as she like tells him the deal and like about time travel and all that stuff, he like instantly believes her. He's like, yeah, okay, makes sense. Tell me everything. And like they just have such complete trust in each other, but more than that, they have such complete respect. So often in both the books and the show, like the reason that their relationship works is not just because they're two incredibly beautiful people, but because they're two people who 100% trust and respect the other person. If Claire says something that Jamie doesn't understand, he just believes her. He respects her autonomy, and is like, yeah, babe, tell me whatever you want me to do. I will figure it out for you. Like they have a complete and total trust and respect for one another's strengths and weaknesses that I just find so refreshing. Certainly in like historical romances, because I've been reading a lot of historical romance novels recently just because I got in the habit, and some of them are fine, but like there is a real lack of respect in terms of like, even amongst two couples that are theoretically equals, when it comes to like how the women are treated. Even women authors treat women in the past like, you know, a little bit silly, a little caught up in the times. But Claire Fraser comes back in time and is like, fuck all of you. I'm from 1945. I know what my deal is. Like, everyone get out of my way. And Jamie Fraser's like, I love this woman. Everything about her is great. And I just think that's really fun. You know, you don't see that. And the way, and he still like justifies a lot of his stuff through his lens of, you know, being a 17th century or an 18th century guy. But he also just loves and respects his wife so much. And like that supersedes every amount of socialization that he's ever gotten. And I think that's neat. And I think it's a really lovely relationship to watch, you know, go on adventures together. I want to watch two people who like respect each other 100%, be in love and go on adventures. Like that's what Outlander is, and it's awesome.
2000%. Just when you think you're getting into familiar territory, it just, you know, it hits the nail on the head. I was like, okay, she's not a princess that needs to be rescued. He's not a hunk who has nothing but his, you know, limited good looks and just a sword. It's like, no, they're all drawn to each other. And again, the filmmakers do a good job of making you just get an idea of what's on everyone's mind, even when they're not talking. And like you say, like you instantly accept the fantasy world without being, whoa, I got to rewind. What the fuck's going on? You know, you're not at all disoriented to where you're just like, this has everything I hate about blockbusters in it. It's like, no,
exactly.
This is on the money. I get it. I really get it. Now I got to soak it in and just think about the details. And it was interesting when I saw it, and, you know, it was weekly, and it's like, okay, well, so this is kind of like Downton Abbey or even one of those other period pieces, fictional set against some historical backdrop. Is like, you really do wonder like how they're going to incorporate, and even how these filmmakers, how did they do such a good job in today's world where everyone is just so ADD stricken, you know, wants everything, wants a Happy Meal then and there, and still wants something to think about afterwards once they got a full tummy. You know? Yeah, it's not easy. Because again, you know, I've even interviewed comedians on this show before, and they said half the time it's not that the comedy isn't working, it's that you just couldn't get anyone's attention. It was slow build up, and a lot of these, this is the right kind of slow at times. I never at all feel like they're making shit up as they go along. Like some issues I had with other shows like Game of Thrones, where it's just like, okay.
But also, like, to be fair to Game of Thrones, not that I want to be fair to Game of Thrones ever, but like the first 3.5 seasons of that show were perfect.
Not to alienate fans, but I got some fucking
I'm not on
issues.
here to make friends, Cam. I am on here to give opinions about television. No, but to be fair to Game of
Trust me,
Thrones,
half my pals will unfriend me after they hear half the shit we're talking about. Anyway,
but yeah, like the back half of Game of Thrones didn't have books anymore, and like also they had made concrete decisions in the early seasons, which were near perfect television, that like forced them into certain directions that were hard to come back around. Because like the thing with Game of Thrones is they always had the ending in mind, but the problem is that like the way George R.R. Martin was sort of plotting all of it out. I heard that is
Jar Jar.
Jar Jar Binks, the famous author of Game of Thrones.
Jar Jar Martin, perfect.
Lisa, Jar Jar Martin.
Lisa gonna make shit up.
Yeah, exactly.
I strongly believe that George R.R. Martin stole his material. I totally blame those lawsuits.
Interesting. Well, that as it may.
If more than 5 people have accused you of stealing their shit, they're probably onto something. So leave that as it is. And
sure, we'll leave that to another day.
Because look at it this way. Why do you complain about, oh, don't finish the show before my book comes out, and then decide, fuck it, I don't want to actually write that book? It's like, okay, well, shut up.
But that was what I was going to say, is that like, at the point, like there is a complete correlation between when the show was really good and when there were still books to pull from. At the point at which they diverged from published material, the show got markedly worse because of a lot of reasons, I'm sure. But like the thing about Outlander is that like they're still several books behind, and there wasn't quite as much within the books. Like they've made major departures from the Outlander books, but the core story remains the same, and they have a lot more material ahead of them. Like there's more train tracks. They don't have to lay down train tracks as they go. The train tracks are still, off in the horizon. And so that's all I will say in defense of Game of Thrones, is that like they were at a disadvantage at a certain point that they set themselves up for poorly. And I feel like Outlander has more of an advantage, and they're also setting themselves up more strategically, even if they didn't have that advantage, because like they made smarter adaptation decisions, in my opinion.
And Outlander knew how to be edgy without being gratuitous or feeling like they didn't know what to do. Like, again, none of these writers are the kind who just want to spend time just on too much build up and not enough material. And so again, there's never a moment.
Outlander's not trying to shock you with like a twist or a, whatever. Like nobody say Outlander spoilers or we'll kill you. Like there's not.
Yeah, Walking Dead. Did you just see what Sons and Zo did? Oh.
Exactly. Like there's not this weird broy fan culture that the showrunners are themselves like lending to. That, puts everyone on edge. Exactly. And it's like, it's not just because it's a romance, but I think it's just because like the kind of fandom that they're trying to build up around them, and the way that they talk about the show isn't about like, you'll never know what happens next. It's like, I won't, because I'm excited to see what you do with it. But it's not this weird like, JNL equals or what was it? The fucking Jon Snow's parentage was a whole thing for a while, and Jon Snow dead, and like all that kind of shit.
Incest family and other bullshit.
That is fine. Some of that is like cool and exciting, and like you get to be a part of like figuring out a mystery with other fans, but sometimes it gets exhausting, and it puts the like the thrill ahead of the actual storytelling. Like I'm so sick of storytellers who are like, I wrote 2 versions of the ending, one version that's my original version, and then one if the fans guess the first version. And I'm like, well, then you're just cutting all of the foreshadowing you put down out of the place. Like I don't want to be surprised, I want to be satisfied. Like surprise is not more important than satisfaction in terms of narrative validity.
Well,
And Outlander doesn't pull that shit. They don't care
and-
if it's predictable as long as it's a cool story.
and it makes for just shitty rewatches.
Exactly.
If you're not a network TV anymore, honey, you can't be doing any more of this. Well, it worked at the time. No, it didn't actually at all. It just we didn't notice it because we didn't have a DVD to binge watch it all together. It doesn't work.
Right. And then they make you feel like an asshole for being like, oh, you thought you could predict what was going to happen. And I was like, well, that's how storytelling works, is you give us clues, and you know, we might not pick up all of them, but like we should at the end be like, oh, that makes sense based on everything you've given me before. Exactly. So yeah, and so I think Outlander smartly does not even play that game. There's never a point where it's like, who's gonna be blah blah blah.
Guess
like
who?
Their tension is what's going to happen next. Like that's plenty. I don't need to know any more details. I don't need to know like who's Jamie's real father. It's like, who gives a shit?
Oh my God.
What's Jamie going to do next when the American Revolution happens? That's the point they're up to in the show, at least, is that the American Revolution is starting, and Jamie has his land in America because of a royal decree from the British. So he has to kind of like play both sides, because he knows from his time traveling family that, like, you know, the American Revolution is going to come through and the Americans are going to win. But for right now, like, he's already been convicted of being a traitor to the crown before and has like been allowed to move forward. But if he's a traitor again too early, like, his whole shit gets fucked, even if he knows that history is going to be on his side this time. So that's interesting. How are they going to deal with that? Like, how many historical figures are we going to get to see them interact with and have Claire totally geek out over? Like, Claire geeks out over historical people in the books all the time, and it's so cute and it's so earnest, and just like, I feel like I know this dude's name. I think he's very important. That's cool. I bet if my daughter was here, she'd know more about him, and I think that was even cooler. But like, I see you over there, Mr. Historical Dude doing stuff.
The most awesome historical man in the world. But yeah, no, like you say, it just like it's frustrating when you see an indie film that's restricted but not making good use of creativity and its budget. It is cool to see that in these quieter moments you are getting a sense of the world, and just like you say, the characters realize they're sometimes near impossible dilemmas, and it's like, that's what you need in a good story, as opposed to, well, we don't know what to do, so let's cut to a random battle that has nothing to do with anything, or let's have some softcore sex just because ratings, baby.
Yeah, no, it feels like, for the most part, everything in the show is earned. And the thing that I like about the books, I will say, is that, like, is basically what I like about the Outlander books is that they're books because it allows us to spend more time on sort of the mundanities. Like, my favorite part of the Outlander books is when Claire's just like hanging out, curing people. There's so, like, truly, like, so much of the books is just her wandering around North Carolina where they settle in the New World, quote unquote, and she just like goes
not
from
the
house
Pocahontas
to house.
New World.
No, exactly.
Yeah, but yeah,
I mean, an equally kind of racist one, let's be honest. Donna, she's a white woman and doing her best, God bless her soul. But like, yeah, Claire just wanders around, like, goes from cabin to cabin and like cures people. She like delivers a baby, then she goes and like saws off someone's foot, and she just like wanders around, like, thinking about, all right, the men are off hunting and I think they're probably going to have this, so we'll have this for dinner, and then, you know, can this much for the winter. Oh, I gotta take off a foot. Moving on. Yeah, like, it's just like the mundane, like her living in the 17th century as a 20th century woman, and that's interesting to me. And you can do that in a book where you can just spend time wandering around with the characters and experiencing things and just living a life. And I really appreciate that about the books. And then on the flip side, I think that the show does a really lovely job of adapting the most exciting parts without cutting around what is cool and interesting and complex about the situations and the characters within. Do I wish they had a handful more episodes per season? Yes, certainly in the latest seasons. But by and large, I feel like it's not only a faithful adaptation, but a like exactly the adaptation they should have done in a lot of ways.
Oh, totally. And like you say, I love how you mentioned that no one gets out scot-free. It does remind me of even different kind of format, but similar kind of intent from this PBS British show called The Midwife. You do have,
I've seen a couple episodes of that.
Okay, yeah, so similar kind of predicament where it's like, okay, you know, that show's kind of driven by a formula. We're gonna show a tough, you know, people giving birth and upper class being cared for by hardworking servants who aren't treated with any dignity or respect. So it is interesting how, yes, you get the feel of, okay, I got the sense of what someone might have been like in this world, even though it's, fiction. It's cool to, again, see the stakes get raised just very naturally. Like you say, you do feel like, okay, they can lose something at every time. What's making them tick right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think I'm glad I read the books as well. And I have a friend who watches the show but doesn't read the books and is always asking me, like, how did this go down in the books? And because we have a lot of conversations about Outlander and its more problematic aspects, because there's a lot of rape. Like, end of season 1, and it does not pull punches in the book either. Like, there is some rough stuff. Like, at one point or another, basically everyone in this show gets raped, sometimes multiple times. It's all like, that's just like the show. And I do think some of that is a little gratuitous. It's like, okay, we can't think of any trauma other than sexual assault. Like, that's the only bad thing that can happen to people. However, what I will say is I think that the way that they handle the aftermath of that kind of like sexual trauma is much more interesting and nuanced than it frankly has any right to be, certainly when you compare it to something like a Game of Thrones, for instance.
Oh yeah, when it happens in Game of Thrones, it feels like you're watching an exploitation movie. It's just not, it's just, and it's
for the service of somebody else reacting to it, or then it becomes this weird, like, I'm glad I got raped because now I'm stronger for it.
I hate Sansa that. Season 6, like no one wants to be assaulted. No.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and you don't get to prescribe like silver linings to a objectively horrifying thing. And I will say, I don't think Outlander does that. I think Outlander does a really good job of showcasing like healing from this is complex and lifelong, and it doesn't go away. And it doesn't necessarily get easier, but you get better at handling it. And like, so spoiler alert, I guess, for Outlander is that when their daughter comes back from the future for the first time to meet her father for the first time, one of the earliest things she and her father bond over, Brianna and Jamie, is that bond is the wrong word, but like she comes back and basically gets instantly raped. Like, one of the first things that their daughter goes through when she comes back to the past is she gets raped. But she and her father go on a hunting trip together and have this like really earnest heart to heart about like the loss of control, and he kind of like points out some triggers that she's had because she's noticed that like she's tensing up in different areas, or she's like blaming herself for all this stuff. And he does a really good job of like, in his own 18th century way, sort of pointing out like, you are not weak. This is just a reaction that your body is having to a loss of control and a horrible thing. You are not weak to be affected by a horrible thing. It is okay. I had that too. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, what other series do you see where a father and a daughter have a conversation where the father talks about his own sexual assault and like helps his daughter get through hers? Like, what other show can do that in a way that doesn't make you want to cringe your face off? So hats off to that. I still think there's too much rape, and they even translated a little more than I thought was ultimately necessary to the show. But sexual assault happens, and I think that on the whole, they do a pretty good job with that. So would I prefer that it wasn't there? Usually, mostly, but I'm not mad at the way that it is often portrayed and like dealt with.
Unlike many other shows, like you say.
Exactly. And like, these shows don't exist in a vacuum, so that's why it's important to add that context. But like, even not in a vacuum, I think they do an okay job. So that's a light pro. Don't watch the season 1 finale scenes with Jamie. Just don't. Just skip them. You can see the thumbnail when it's his scene, and you just skip over that part. That's my recommendation. You know what's happening. It's explicitly explained. You do not need to see it.
By all means.
That's my recommendation. Should we move on to cons? I'm conscious of time.
Oh, totally. And I mean, before we go on even more, did you watch this on Netflix or did you see it on cable TV?
I caught up on Netflix, but only like the first 2 or 3 seasons at the time we're on it. So then I got an Amazon Prime Stars add-on and watched the rest there. I don't have cable or like an actual TV. I just have streaming. So yeah, I watch via the Showtime add-on.
Oh, Okay, nice. So the Stars add
They're not
on,
Showtime. Stars. You're yes,
yeah.
Stars.
I saw you could
keep
access
saying
it through
Showtime.
Hulu, and I saw it was currently on Netflix, but I didn't know if all the seasons were. So that it's
Yeah,
going to be
all the seasons
interesting.
are on the Stars add-ons, but Netflix only has the first, I want to say 4 now. I think they recently added 4, but there's still season 5, which is exclusively on Stars or whatever Stars add-on that you happen to be using. And I imagine season 6 will be the same. They'll add it, 1 episode the day after it airs, kind of a thing. So I think it comes out Sundays usually. So I imagine Mondays is when it'll drop on the apps.
Okay, very neat. So yeah, cons. Well, I think the
Roger
acting's fine.
Wakefield.
Roger Wakefield. Okay, Roger.
I don't know if you've ever met you have if you've seen the first 2 seasons, but you've met him as a child. He's the little kid that lives in the house that Frank and Claire stay at when they go on their initial honeymoon to Scotland. He's the Reverend's kid. He later grows up to marry Jamie and Claire's daughter, and he sucks ass. He's the worst guy ever.
Yeah, the less time spent on him, the better. But it's pretty hard to do when he's grown up.
I feel like I need to say that he sucks. He sucks. He is more of a misogynist than his 18th century father-in-law. It is absurd that Donna presents him as in any way equal or deserving to or deserving of the beautiful special angel that is Brianna Fraser. How dare he? But enough about Roger.
but the show does good though at, portraying what a pig he is, and
they lighten it. They shade it in. Like,
no, that is a con. But
the show doesn't think he's a pig, and neither does the books. Like, he's presented as the new generation romantic lead for the daughter of Claire and Jamie. Like, he's presented as the ultimate, he's fine. He's Galus Duncan's, great ancestor. Or Galus Duncan is his ancestor. Dougal Mackenzie is his ancestor. Like, he's part of the family. We love Roger. He's great. And that's what really sets me off. Because, Blackjack Randall is presented as a villain. Of course he's a villain. He brutally raped Jamie Fraser for 2 episodes in season 1. But he's presented as a bad guy, right? Roger is not. Roger is presented as the love interest for their daughter. Absurd. Absolutely absurd.
And that's what's weird. I don't know if it was the acting that also just made me say, surely they got to be in on it, but I don't think there are plenty of moments where it's no.
It is hard to tell, but I've read all but the final book, which hasn't come out yet. The book does not seem to want to really pressure him to change. The book seems sort of on his side, or at least complacent with how he is, because there's a point in the books, in the later books, where they go back to the future after having kids in the past. Spoiler alert again, I guess. It's not, the Outlander TV show is not going to get here for a while, but they go back to the future and Brianna gets a job to support them because Roger doesn't have a job yet, and he has a whole POV chapter where he complains that his wife isn't making dinner because she's not in the past anymore and she's allowed to have a job, and he kind of resents that she's allowed to have a job, even as he acknowledges, well, I don't have a job, so one of us has to work. But he's still salty that he has to make the kids dinner and take care of the kids, and his wife isn't just at the house like she would be in the past. This is presented without comment, without irony, and is just a thing that happens and we move on from. And it's I'm sorry. What?
I'm glad I forgot those moments.
Well, that happens in the book. I don't know. Have you read the book?
No, I have not.
So yeah, we're not we're.
I thought they showed
ahead.
some of the behind the scenes though, of the kitchen in one episode.
Well, that might be a different scene. Roger's bad in all scenes, so we could be talking about anything. But I'm specifically talking about what happens several years after where the show is right now. Because they go back to the future before coming back to the past.
To the future.
Exactly. It gets very confusing in the timelines. But there's at least one book where they're fully in the future again after having lived in the past for quite a while.
This makes better sense than Back to the Future, though.
Barely. But so I would say just blanket statement, everything about Roger sucks and I hate him. Other cons, I don't know if the show does a great job with race. There's a gas leak season and a gas leak book where they're in the oh shoot, where are they? They're in the Caribbean, and like, because Jamie's Jamie's nephew has been kidnapped by, we eventually find out, Galis Duncan, still kicking. And they just like spend a whole season in the Caribbean where like they're watching the slave trade happen. And then there's a whole thing about like escaped slaves and like a weird ritual thing. And like, it's really unclear what's trying to be said. And then fan favorite John Gray is sort of a plantation owner, question mark.
Yeah.
Nobody says one way or another if he actually owns slaves or not.
They shy
and
away
like,
from that one. So
they really do. Basically, like there's a scene where Claire watches like a slave auction go down and gets really upset. And so Jamie buys a guy so that they can set him free. And he like whispers to her, like, when does this end? And she's like, not for another like 150 years. And he just sort of like nods sadly. And that's it. That's all that they deal with it about. And like, I'm not saying that I want Claire to become like a 18th century abolitionist. Exactly. Like I'm not asking for the white saviorness of it, but like,
oh yeah, that would be worse.
Exactly.
Like,
well, right. Like there
that just would not have happened. It just wasn't.
Yeah.
It would have happened, but it would have been very minuscule. Like it took a year.
And that's also not the story she wants to tell, and that's fair. But I don't know. It feels like they're tiptoeing around it, and in some ways,
I got that. It did have
I mean?
awkward edits where it's like, okay, you're introducing a scene. Can I at least see him be a shithead? You know, instead of acting like, oh, goody two shoes. He may or may not.
Even if he's a goody two shoes, that's fine. But like, I feel like there's a lot of times where they want to sanitize it, where they want to be like, yes, she's obviously morally outraged, but that's not the story we're telling. So like, we just won't have Black people in our show. And it's like, well, that doesn't seem like the right decision either. And I'm curious, do you know the racial makeup of their writers' room? I'm not aware. I imagine
it seems like it's mainly men and women that Ronald D. Moore has worked with. I think so, mainly white.
Yeah. Because like that I mean, that's a big part of it, is like the diversity of the writers' room. Like when it's one thing when it's a book and it's only from one person's perspective, although of course that's what sensitivity readers are for, and
Stephen
cultural
Barr
consultants
is on here, so I know he was pretty good at mixing in minorities like on Deep Space Nine, but
but mixing in minorities is different from like telling a historical fiction story where slavery still exists and finding a way to handle it that isn't just, oh, horrible. So back to the love story with the white people. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that, again, it doesn't need to be that Claire starts the Underground Railroad, because that's also bad. But I am personally uncomfortable with the way that they handle racial issues. I will say in the books they're okay about Native Americans, and there's this whole sequence where Jamie realizes how like the way that the British talk about the natives is really skewed, and it's actually very similar to how they talk about Scottish people, because he recognizes some similar like cultural practices around hunting between Highlanders and the Native Americans, which I thought was really lovely of him, like finding like, oh wow, I have a lot of cultural things that we do when we hunt that seem very similar, obviously different in like content, but like same in spirit to what I'm observing the natives doing. And so like he becomes a good friend of a lot of their like neighboring tribes, which I thought was really interesting. And I thought that was a cool way of sort of bridging the like initial assumption from, the propaganda at the time with the reality of actually living with people who are different than you.
Yes.
But then it still comes to the point where they're like, but also, we're going to wipe basically all of these people off the planet in like the next 50 years if the Americans
don't mind us. We're only going to exterminate an entire race.
Exactly. So then that gets kind of awkward again, because all of our viewpoint characters are white people, and our authors and everyone who's writing about this are white people. And I can't in good conscience necessarily recommend this show from the perspective of like, this is an exploration of like everything going down in history. You know what I mean? Like I don't feel great about the way that it portrays and does or doesn't portray the racial realities of the time in a particularly nuanced or sensitive way. Like everyone's on the side of like racism bad, slavery bad, but like being on the side of slavery bad and just sort of mostly ignoring all slaves and the slaves you do see and the slave owners you do see being like on good terms with each other, I don't know, doesn't hit me great.
Well, no, I'm with you. I mean, because even when someone feels, I don't feel like I have anything constructive to add, you still kind of wish, okay, but if we're going to be realistic, let's not shy away. Let's have a little, at least one slave character who says something important in there. And like, again,
I mean, I don't know. I don't think we're the right people to necessarily say it. And that's like kind of the point, is that they need a more diverse writer's room, and like people
at least
around
some
them
British
kind of
or
guide.
Irish, African, writer who could weigh in on the times and, like you say,
well, in
be
the
one of voices.
later seasons, they're in America. They are like literally in North Carolina. They settle in North Carolina at some point in the books and in the show, in season 4-ish.
Now, it would be still, like you say, it'd be interesting to ask other people's, like, what would you like to incorporate into here? If
Yeah, like what feels non-exploitative, but also not like we're trying to like.
Because we hate plot
sanitize.
devices, but we also dislike, again, like you say, shying away from a
like
topic
this is
that gets introduced, regardless of whether it was intentional or not.
Exactly, it feels like it's sort of just them being like, yeah, we all hate racism, so back to the white people story. It's like, that's fine that there's
no,
their
on the
characters
sports.
are white. Exactly, it's like, I mean, come on. This is, anyways, I that's another con, is that like
it's
an
a little
extremely
too
white
careful
show.
for its own good. Yeah,
it's too careful, but it's also like not careful enough. You know what I mean? So like it's a very white person's romp through history, which most romps are, because I have you ever seen the show Timeless?
Yes, similar aspect. That's I'm glad you brought that up, because like that that
I
it's
thought
not,
that show did a really good job, because like their black time traveling characters, like he's never shying away from like, hey, this is fucked up. And there's like a lot of asides where like he gets treated really poorly in the past. And I really like that in season 2, they give him a whole episode where like he is the historical expert, because they go back and like have to deal with something related to the Black Panther movement. And he knows a lot about it. And he is like the viewpoint character of that whole time. And the like main historian lady, whose whole job is to like know about history, like lets him lead, because she's like, I'm ashamed to say I don't actually know a lot about this. And he's like, yeah, that makes sense, and that's not great. And I appreciate that. Well, that show also doesn't do an amazing job. They don't try to pretend like it's all hunky-dory, and they don't make a bunch of like slave jokes. They're like, hey, it's fucked up that you have to be a slave again. I'm really sorry about that. And then like, that character, I don't remember what his name is, but I can see the guy in my head very clearly. He's also from Better Off Ted. I think he does a really lovely job.
Hey man, you're going to town with the cult TV stuff. Nice. But
I'm a TV girl. I don't watch movies, but TV, I'm on the TV.
I watch the ones that don't suck. I'll put it that way.
I mean, fair enough.
but yes, I know what you mean. It is interesting how it's like, for that was a formula where it's like, don't get too comfy. They're going to go to a different place every week. But yeah, no, it is interesting how it's like that show dared to be a little, is like, okay, let's be honest. You're being undercover, so let's be frank. Here's who you're portraying. Here's who you're representing.
This is how time travel privilege works.
Unfortunately, you're gonna have to be in a derogatory role but it gets away with it, because basically they're time traveling spies. Basically, they're stuck.
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of getting away from it, but I think it's a matter of like being realistic about this is what it looks like, without like sanitizing it, and without just saying like, well, we're not going to deal with this. Actually, it was fine for Black people all times. Actually, this is totally not fucked up that the Black character is consistently being put in positions where like he might get hurt, because looking like he does is more and more dangerous the further back in time they jump. And it doesn't feel quite as like white people centric. It feels like this is a show that is not afraid to say, hey, this is fucked up. And I don't know if Outlander does that beyond the cursory, like, slavery bad. Okay,
it does
on.
The basics, but yeah,
it's almost like, well, why bring it up then? Like, if we're gonna be talking to slave owners all the time, and the best you can do is like, I don't want to inherit a property with slaves on it, which is a plot point in, I think, season 5 of the
somewhere
show.
around there.
Book 4 or 5. Yeah, there's like a whole thing about how Jamie's aunt has lived in the States for a while, or not the States, yeah, but has lived in America for a while, and like owns a plantation with a bunch of slaves on it, and she wants to give it to Jamie to like inherit from her, and he's like, no, I don't want to live here, because like at first they were like, yeah, sure, and we'll free all the slaves, but then they learn how hard it is to free slaves, and how a lot of the times, like, even if they pay the money to like free all of the slaves, which is like an incredible expense that they wouldn't be able to afford, it also doesn't preclude other white people from re-enslaving them, or for just saying like, I don't believe you that you're a freed slave, so you're going to be a slave again. So even if they do it like by the book, which is really, really hard and will probably get them killed in the process, like they still wouldn't be able to ensure the safety of everyone on the plantation. So they're like, I'm out. And that's interesting, but also like, maybe we should spend, if you're going to go through all the like work of researching how hard it is to free a slave, then why are their perspectives not brought up? Why are we just saying like, okay, well, I guess it's not our problem then, and then leaving? Like, that's not a good look either.
Yeah, well, and just like you say, is like it does so many things right, and the small parts, they're minuscule, but they kind of still add up. Is like, okay, I need a little bit of a perspective on this
right. And it's not about like this show should be about this other thing. Like that's not what the show is about. The show is about it's a love story and an adventure story, and that's fine. But then
like you
don't
say, it's not all just romantic escapism to where there are no consequences. So
right, but the consequences aren't about like this isn't a story about race, and that's fine. I'm not saying that like Donna Galbadon has to write a story about race, but if you're going to have characters regularly that we are in contact with that are slave owners, you got to do more than saying, yeah, slavery's bad, but I guess I'll deal with it. Don't
think about it too hard.
Exactly. It's like either deal with it or don't. Like this weird middle ground is not a good look for anyone.
No.
Other cons though, I think there's a little too much sexual assault. There's too much Roger, certainly. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is one of those shows where
it's not bad to where you're just like, oh my god, get on with it. But there are a few moments where it's like, okay, episode 12 could have been episode 13.
Yeah, I'll definitely say if you kept watching in season 3 is rough because like a full almost half of the season is spent where Claire is in the future and Jamie is back in the past, and it's just so brutally depressing because they're not together and they're both so sad about it. Like Claire's got some interesting stuff because she's like raising their daughter and like becoming a doctor, and that's cool. And then we come back to Jamie and he's like in prison for years and years being horribly mistreated, in hiding for years and years being horribly mistreated. It's like, this is a bummer for more than an episode or two, guys. Like, I don't even watch that part of the season when I rewatch the show to like catch up again. I just fully skipped. I'm like, it's not that I need them to be making out constantly. Like, I like the show for reasons other than it's a cool show about a relationship I care a lot about. But like, good God, this is not what I signed up for.
Well, I think that'll sum up most of what's just appealing about it all together. Thank you ever so much for being on here. And would you care to promote under your podcast?
Yeah, so I'm a multi-podcaster. I have a Burn Notice podcast called Burn, Noticed.
Burn, baby, burn.
Yeah, Burn Noticed. It's a recap podcast of the USA television show Burn Notice. You can find that on Twitter at Burn Noticed Pod. That's Burn Noticed with a D. I also have an independent filmmaking podcast. So if you're a creator or you want to be a creator and you want earnest, transparent, honest conversations about the process of building a career in film, we have a podcast called Breaking Out of Breaking In. You can find it on Twitter at Breaking Out Pod.
And I'm glad you formed that because I get so tired of everyone just acting like, hey, my icon did this or that. I'm like, you do realize the market has changed. So you got to just take every bit of advice from anyone and see how it applies to your current predicament instead of,
like the thing that we were really reacting to with that podcast is like most film podcasts are either like one rich white guy, like it's so easy to be a filmmaker with my daddy's $100,000, or they're podcasts that are just like, they just interview people and just talk about like, oh, why do you make film? And it's like, that's nice, I guess, if I care about the guest. But for the most part, it's just, indie filmmakers talking to other indie
Everyone's got
filmmakers, and
ass.
it's like a weird circle jerk thing. And so we
It
really
real-
make a
I'm glad you say that is my favorite insult, but no, it's so true. I once got asked, "Hey, Cam, you know all this and that, would you like to teach a film class?" I'm like, "Fuck no," because A, I have not been successful, so I would be a total contrarian if I did that, and B, again, you know, you gotta. There's no easy answer to this, so that there's so many
Right.
structures to it. You got to build the formula. It would make better sense to have like multiple different people saying, "I've done this kind of movies for this kind of industry, so I'll be your mentor for these kind of people pursuing this kind of career." But that's the other thing too. Then it gets trivial in that, you know, your career takes off and it's not exactly in the way you got, and so then you just, you know, you might.
I just think people aren't honest about how they get to the places that they get, and when
they
we do
shy
have
away.
guests
You're talking
on,
about shying away on this show. There's so much shying away
like,
on.
yeah,
This
so
is not how this industry works.
my podcast partner and I are really specific when we bring guests on. We don't bring guests on who won't be transparent with us about like, is this how you're making your living? If not, how are you making your living? How did you get this job? And it's not about like, so I can follow in your exact footsteps, but it's more about like, this is the reality of how long it took this person to get into their first writer's room. This is the reality of like, I had these 3 privileges. This is the reality of like, this is how you write a personal statement that doesn't embarrass you. And we want to get really granular and not just like skip over the hard parts. Like, sure, I want to hear why you like making the work that you do, but like, this is a career podcast. I want to know how you got your first job. I want to know what your networking strategies are. I want to know that it's not just bubbles and roses and you came out of the womb a fully formed writer's room assistant, you know, like, how did you get that job? Don't bullshit me. And
your trade is secrets, and don't act like, oh, you're stealing movie ideas. No, I'm asking you how you make your livelihood, and
and to be honest, if you're not making
college
it from that.
combined.
Exactly. So yeah, so that's like that. If that sounds interesting to you, that's what that podcast is we try to be really honest and practical. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then for me, if you want to just follow me for my good opinions and how much I hate Roger Wakefield,
good opinions.
My opinions, which are all good 100% of the time. You cannot argue with me because I am perfect and godlike. You can find me. You can find me at Brizone World on every platform, BRISOWNWORLD, or just Google Bri Castellini, and you'll find literally everything I've ever done. I'm the only Bri Castellini on the internet.
You don't bullshit,
which is
guys.
Convenient.
This is awesome.
Well, thank you. But that's my plugs. Thanks so much for having me. This was a really fun conversation.
You rocked it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will welcome you back to again. Insert some brutal honesty into some other subjects that
hey, you need brutal honesty. I am your girl.
We don't go with the whole, well, here's what IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes says. No, here's what a lot of people are in general saying, you know, is like, here's the pop culture side of this whole thing, and why is it even a culture to begin with? So yeah.
Awesome.
We'll return after these messages.
JURS Podcast is proud to promote AutoCorrect, an independent film company with experienced industry professionals who can serve all your film industry needs. They include self-tapes, voice actor recordings, demo reel editing, script revisions, headshots, and much more. They're Actor Correct at your request. Book them on Instagram.
Hey, feeling down? Feeling low? Not enough podcasts about movies in your life? Why not try
They must be destroyed on sight.
the new Podcast Cure-All, sure to get you right with the world and on a path to better living. We have exploitation, we have Italian horror, we have zombies, we have slashers, we have crime films, we have spaghetti westerns, we even have sci-fi and sex comedies. So take a dose of
They must be destroyed on sight.
as needed, and let the hosts, Lee Russell, Daniel Harper, Paul Romali, and the odd guest host cure what ails you.
Warning, may cause atrophy, African consumption, black fever, bone shave, chin cough, colic, cramp colic, dropsy of the brain, elephantitis, grocer's itch, jaundice, mania, miasma, mortification, palsy, Pott's disease, rheumatism, scurvy, St. Anthony's fire, summer complaint, and worm fit in some people. Consult a physician before listening.
Did you ever see a film at such a young age it left you traumatized with cinematic wounds?
Nick
Necrophilia. It's a dead issue, man. Don't push it. Cinema Psyops is a weekly podcast documenting an ongoing experiment on the mind of an unwilling test subject.
No one should have to watch this movie.
Oh, no one should have to watch this?
No one should have to watch this movie.
Surprisingly, it's not a topic that a lot of people really want to tackle.
I'm shocked, prudes.
I know, really.
Right?
It's the next sexual frontier that no one wants to explore.
I am, in the most sincerest of senses, disappointed in you.
It takes a powerful goddess like Connie, jam her arm down the monster's throat and kill it. Oh, I'm still tripping out over that. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta find a girl like that. Every week, I get a new look of disappointment that I never thought I could get out of her.
Unimaginable. At 12 years old, you should not be watching this movie.
Obviously.
At 13, you should not be. 14, you shouldn't be. I'm not entirely sure even 17-year-olds should be watching this.
Just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you have the right to demand that it doesn't exist. Watching this film again, I had all of this like little nerd glee with everything that kept
little
popping
history
up.
doll popping up
absolutely.
at you.
So I totally loved this film.
Hey, I know why you couldn't see that. It's because your brain's warped from watching this shit at 12 years old.
Yeah, this is a rough movie. I told you ahead of time when we were getting ready to do it that it was
How
going to be a
could you
rough
watch
one.
this shit at 12?
Because physical wounds heal, cinematic ones don't. Listen to Cinema Psyops.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey.
And I'm Zach, and we're the hosts of Podcasting After Dark, a cast dedicated to late-night horror and sci-fi of the 80s and 90s, often found on HBO and Cinemax.
You know, the movies your parents didn't want you watching as a kid. You can find us every other week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher.
This is what you want.
This is what you get.
Greetings, friends. My name is Dean Legero, and I'm the host of the 3324 podcast. I invite you to join me and my lifelong friend Eric Kuber to come with us as we discuss the music and movies that shaped our life. Each week, we'll pick an album or film that we really connect to, and not only give you some great info and trivia, but also discuss, debate, and celebrate what it means to us and the journey it took us on. We also look forward to hearing from you and giving us some of your picks for us to check out and discuss. I think it'll be a really fun experience, so come along with us for the ride. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider and at 3324.buzzsprout.com. Thanks for your time, and welcome to the 3324 family.
It's time, let's check our queue, baby. Pair it with a couple brews, baby. We love good movies. We love the bad ones too. So we watch them all and pass their lessons on to you. Oh yeah. Everything I learned from movies helps to make life a little bit groovy. With a one-liner plot holes and gratuitous movies. It's time to get busy with your friend Steve and Izzy at eilfm.podbean.com.
We now continue with our program.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up review show.